Jack had lived a long, quiet life in the wide open spaces of his family's ranch. The land stretched for miles, bordered by mountains in the distance and an endless sky above. He had always been a man of few words, content with his work and the steady rhythm of life on the ranch. There was something about the silence of the land that suited him perfectly. But even in the peace of his everyday routine, there were moments when Jack felt the weight of isolation. His friends were few, and even though he loved the ranch, he sometimes longed for a different kind of company. On this particular evening, after a long day of checking the cattle, Jack drove his dusty pickup truck into the small town just outside his ranch. The town was nothing more than a cluster of old buildings with a few shops and a rundown bar that seemed to be the only place where locals gathered. Jack didn't usually stop by, but tonight he felt like a drink. It had been a hard day, and a cold beer seemed like the best way to unwind. As he entered the bar, the familiar smell of beer and wood mixed with the warmth of the low lighting. There weren't many people inside, just a few old-timers sitting at the bar sharing stories of days gone by. Jack made his way to an empty stool and ordered a beer, nodding politely at the bartender. He wasn't in the mood for small talk. He just wanted to enjoy the quiet and relax. It was then that he noticed her. She was sitting in the far corner of the bar, alone, looking out of place in a room full of ranchers and farmers. Her clothes were too fine for the dusty town. A sleek dress and a pair of expensive boots that seemed out of place in this rural setting. Her hair was dark and styled perfectly, not a strand out of place. She looked like someone from a much bigger city. She wasn't the type of woman Jack usually saw in this bar, and it piqued his curiosity. She noticed him too, her eyes meeting his for just a moment before she looked away. Jack couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed, though he couldn't figure out why. He wasn't used to the attention, especially not from someone like her. He took a long swig of his beer, trying to ignore the feeling that she was watching him. But then she did something unexpected. She stood up and walked over to him. Jack had barely taken his eyes off the bar, not wanting to seem rude. But he could feel her presence drawing closer. She stopped beside him and smiled, a warm smile that seemed almost out of place in a bar like this. "Mind if I join you?" she asked in a voice that was smooth and confident. Jack looked up at her, a little taken aback. He wasn't used to being approached by women, especially women like her. But something about her smile made him feel more comfortable. "Sure," he said, his voice rough from the long day of work. She sat down beside him, not waiting for an invitation. She ordered a drink from the bartender and they began talking. Her name was Emily, and she explained that she was passing through town, on her way to somewhere else. She had a way of speaking that seemed practiced, as though she had said these words before to other strangers. She told Jack she was just looking for a place to rest for the night. At first, Jack didn't ask too many questions. He wasn't the type of man to pry into someone else's business. But as the evening wore on, he started to wonder why she was so far from home and so alone in this small town. They talked about all sorts of things, the weather, the town, and the people who lived there. Jack found himself listening to her more than he had planned. There was something about her that drew him in, something mysterious. She didn't seem like the type of person who would choose a small, quiet town as her destination. She asked him questions too, about the ranch, about his life, and about the simple life he led. Jack wasn't used to talking about himself, but for some reason, he found himself answering her questions honestly. Maybe it was the way she listened, or maybe it was just the company. Whatever it was, Jack began to relax. But as the night went on, Jack started to feel a bit uneasy. Something was off. He couldn't put his finger on it, but there was an underlying tension in the air. He could see it in her eyes. Something guarded, something that suggested she wasn't being completely honest with him. It wasn't that she was rude or evasive, but there was a quality to her that made him feel like she was hiding something. As the evening stretched into night, the bar grew quieter. The other patrons left one by one, and soon Jack and Emily were the only ones left. Emily seemed more at ease now, as if she were no longer worried about anything. She leaned in closer to Jack, her voice softer. "I'm glad I met you," she said. "You seem like a good man." Jack didn't know how to respond. He had heard that before, but somehow the way she said it made him feel uncomfortable. He smiled awkwardly, unsure of what to say next. But before he could speak, she said something that stopped him dead in his tracks. "I've paid for this," she said. her voice lowering even more. Just do it. The words hit him like a slap in the face. Jack froze. His mind raced, trying to process what she meant. Did she mean what he thought she meant? He stared at her, his heart pounding in his chest. Emily didn't seem to notice his hesitation. She leaned back almost casually, as if the words she had just spoken were nothing out of the ordinary. Jack's mind raced. He had never been in a situation like this before. What was he supposed to do? He had no idea what Emily's life had been like, but he could see it in her eyes. Desperation, maybe even a sense of defeat. Was she really offering herself to him in exchange for something? He didn't know what to make of it, and for the first time in a long while, Jack didn't know what to do. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Everything around him, the bar, the empty stools, the faint hum of the jukebox, seemed to fade into the background. The only thing Jack could hear was the sound of his own heart beating in his chest. Then, without even thinking, he stood up. He turned away, his back to Emily, and walked to the door of the bar. His mind was racing, and he didn't know what to do next. Was this a test? Had he been fooled into thinking he was helping her when all along she was playing him? He didn't know, but one thing was certain. Jack had never felt more uncertain in his life. Jack stepped outside the bar, the cold night air hitting his face as he walked to his truck. The hum of the town seemed distant now, swallowed by the stillness of the evening. He climbed into the truck, his mind racing. The words Emily had spoken echoed in his head. "I've paid for this, just do it." What did she mean? He wasn't sure, but the way she had said it left a knot in his stomach. He started the truck, the engine rumbling to life, but he didn't go anywhere. He sat there for a moment, staring through the windshield into the dark. He had lived a quiet, simple life on the ranch where things made sense. The land, the animals, the steady rhythm of farm life, it was all predictable. But tonight was different. He couldn't stop thinking about Emily. She wasn't like the women Jack had known. She was out of place in this town, in his life. She had looked so confident when she walked into the bar, so at ease with herself. But her words, they had struck him deep. There was something about the way she spoke that made him feel both drawn to her and, at the same time, deeply uncomfortable. She wasn't just a stranger. She was someone with a past, someone who carried a burden he couldn't yet understand. Jack thought back to their conversation. She had told him so little about herself, just bits and pieces that didn't add up. She said she was passing through, but Jack didn't believe that for a second. People didn't just show up in a town like this looking like they belonged in a city far away. He had heard the way she spoke, the elegance of her words, the way she carried herself. All of it seemed so out of place for someone who claimed to be just passing through. But that wasn't the part that troubled Jack. It was the look in her eyes, the vulnerability she tried so hard to hide. She had something going on, something she wasn't saying. It wasn't just her offer, it was everything. The desperation that had crept into her voice when she spoke about needing money, about her life. Jack knew better than to ignore that. He slammed his hand down on the steering wheel in frustration, his mind still spinning. He had been raised to be a man of honor, to stand by his word, to never take advantage of someone in need. He couldn't just walk away from her, not after what she had said. After a long pause, Jack put the truck in gear and headed back to the bar. He wasn't sure what he would say or do, but he knew he couldn't leave things the way they were. Emily was still in there, and whatever game she was playing, Jack wasn't about to let her play it alone. When he pulled back into the parking lot, the bar was nearly empty. The soft glow of the neon sign flickered in the distance as Jack walked back inside. Emily was still at the bar, nursing her drink, her face turned toward the window, lost in thought. She didn't see him at first, and for a moment Jack just stood there watching her. She looked so different from the confident woman who had approached him earlier. Now she looked almost fragile, like someone who had been worn down by life. Jack took a deep breath and walked toward her. She looked up when she heard him approach, her eyes flickering with surprise. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them felt thick, heavy with the weight of unspoken words. "Jack," she said finally, her voice soft. "You came back?" He nodded, sitting down next to her without saying a word. There was a brief moment of silence before Emily turned to face him. Her eyes searched his face as if she were looking for something in his expression. Jack didn't know what to say. He couldn't just pretend like everything was fine after what had happened. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Why did you come back? Jack hesitated. He didn't know how to explain it. Maybe it was because he couldn't stand the thought of leaving her alone with whatever demons she was battling. Maybe it was because he had seen something in her that reminded him of the pain he had buried deep inside for so long. Whatever the reason, he knew he couldn't walk away. I don't know, he finally said. Maybe because I can't leave someone like you out there, not knowing what kind of life you've had. Emily's eyes widened slightly and she looked away. Her fingers gripped the edge of her glass, the ice cubes clinking softly as she fidgeted. Jack saw the way her shoulders slumped, the way her expression softened in a mixture of relief and sadness. She didn't say anything, but he could tell she was thinking hard about something. What if I don't want your help? She said after a long pause, her voice shaky. What if I'm fine just the way I am? Jack didn't answer right away. He could see the pride in her eyes, the way she tried to hide her vulnerability behind a wall of defiance. He had met people like her before, people who refused to admit they needed help even when it was clear as day. But Jack knew that pride could only take someone so far before it broke them. I can't just leave you like this, Jack said quietly. I don't know your story, Emily, but I know you're carrying something heavy, and I don't want to walk away from that. For the first time, she met his eyes, and in that moment Jack could see the truth behind her guarded expression. There was something more to her than just the woman sitting in front of him. She was someone who had been broken, someone who had given up on the world in some way. I'm not asking for your pity, Emily said, her voice sharp, though it trembled. I didn't want anyone to feel sorry for me. I don't need your charity. I'm not giving you charity, Jack replied, his voice steady. I'm giving you a chance. A chance to do something different. Emily laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. It was bitter, full of frustration. A chance at what? She asked. A chance to become like you? A rancher who spends his days in the dirt and never asks for more? No thanks. I've seen enough of that life. Jack stared at her, his heart sinking. He wasn't sure what to say. She had a point, of course. She was right. Her life was far different from his, and maybe that was why he didn't understand her completely. But he wasn't about to give up on her. Not when he could see that there was so much more to her than the woman she showed to the world. I don't know what your life's been like, Jack said finally, but I know it doesn't have to stay this way. You don't have to keep running from whatever it is you're running from. She didn't answer him, but Jack could see the faintest hint of doubt in her eyes. It wasn't much, but it was enough for him to hold on to. Maybe, just maybe, she was starting to believe in something better. And Jack was willing to wait, to help her find whatever that was. The following days were filled with small but meaningful changes. Jack's offer had shaken something inside Emily. Though she resisted at first, the kindness he showed her had left a mark. She wasn't used to being treated like this, not without some kind of price attached. But Jack was different. He didn't expect anything in return. All he wanted to do was help her. And for the first time in a long while, Emily began to wonder if maybe she deserved that help. It wasn't easy for her to accept. She had lived for so long with walls around her, protecting herself from the world, from people who only wanted something from her. Trust wasn't something Emily gave easily, but she had learned to survive by doing the exact opposite. She had learned to be independent, to never rely on anyone, and certainly not on men like Jack. The truth was, she didn't even know what it meant to let someone help her. But as the days passed, Emily found herself slowly accepting Jack's offer. She moved into the small, modest apartment Jack had arranged for her in town. It wasn't much, just a simple, clean space above a local shop. But to Emily, it was a world away from the life she had been leading. She had always found comfort in isolation, in keeping things to herself. But now, for the first time, she was living with a sense of security, of something stable, something she hadn't known for years. Jack didn't push her to talk about her past. He didn't ask her what had happened to her or why she ended up in this small town. Instead, he let her take things at her own pace. He visited her now and then, checking in, bringing her fresh produce from the ranch, or just sitting with her in silence. Jack didn't need words to make her feel like she wasn't alone. His presence was enough. It was on one of those visits that Jack noticed the change in Emily. She had started to smile more. It wasn't a perfect smile, and it wasn't constant, but it was there. She was starting to open up, bit by bit. She no longer had the guarded look in her eyes, and when they spoke, she seemed more genuine, more at ease. She didn't talk about her past yet, but Jack could see that she was beginning to trust him, even if she didn't fully understand why. One afternoon, Jack asked her if she wanted to join him on the ranch. He didn't ask her to help with the work, just to spend time with him, to see the life he had built. At first, she hesitated. She was used to a fast-paced world, one full of noise and distractions. The quiet open space of the ranch seemed foreign to her, a place where she didn't belong. But Jack was patient. He didn't pressure her, just waited for her to make up her mind. Finally, Emily agreed. It wasn't an easy decision for her, but there was something about Jack's invitation that felt different. She was curious and maybe, just maybe, she wanted to see what a simpler life could feel like. It was a big step for her, but it was a step she was willing to take. When they arrived at the ranch, the vastness of the land took her breath away. It was unlike anything she had ever seen. The open fields stretched as far as the eye could see, with the sun setting behind the hills, casting a golden light across the landscape. The sound of the wind in the trees, the rustling of leaves, the quiet hum of life on the ranch, and it was peaceful, almost magical. Jack led her to a spot by the barn where the cattle grazed. He didn't say much at first, just let her take in the scene. Emily stood there, her eyes wide with wonder, feeling a strange sense of calm settle in her chest. She had never experienced anything like this before. The world felt different here. For a moment, she forgot about the past. She forgot about the life she had been running from. She was just there, in that moment, on Jack's ranch, surrounded by the beauty of the land. She felt something stir within her, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Jack noticed the way Emily looked at the land, the way her shoulders relaxed as she stood there. He didn't say anything, but he felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that, in some small way, he was helping her find peace. He wasn't trying to fix her, wasn't trying to change her. He just wanted to show her that there was a different way to live, one that didn't have to be filled with pain and struggle. As the days passed, Emily started to spend more time at the ranch. She didn't do much at first. She helped Jack feed the animals or took walks through the fields, just taking it all in. She even started to learn a little about the ranch work, asking Jack questions about the cattle, about the land, about how everything fit together. Jack was more than happy to teach her, though he never pushed her to do anything she wasn't ready for. It was on one of these days that Emily started to realize something. She didn't have to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders anymore. She didn't have to pretend to be someone she wasn't. For the first time, she felt like she could breathe, like she could finally put down the heavy burden she had been carrying for so long. Jack never expected anything in return for his help, but he couldn't help but feel a quiet satisfaction watching Emily start to find her footing. She wasn't the same woman who had walked into the bar that night, desperate and broken. She was stronger now, more confident in herself and in the choices she was making. Jack had helped her find the courage to believe in something better, something beyond the pain and the struggles of her past. But even as Emily began to heal, the past wasn't done with her. One evening, as Jack and Emily sat on the porch, watching the stars begin to appear in the sky, she finally spoke. She had been quiet for a long time, her thoughts swirling inside her, and now they spilled out in a rush. "I don't know how to thank you, Jack," she said, her voice low. "I don't know how to repay you for everything you've done for me, but I'm scared. Scared that I won't be able to hold on to this peace. I'm scared that one day it will all disappear, and I'll be right back where I was." Jack turned to look at her, his expression kind, but firm. "You don't have to repay me for anything, Emily. What you're doing now, it's all on you. You've got the strength to make it through. I know you do." Emily looked at him, her eyes filled with emotion. "I don't know if I believe that," she whispered. "You will," Jack said, his voice steady. "Just give it time, one step at a time." And in that moment, Emily believed him. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time she felt like she could face it. The cowboy stood in silence, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. He could see the desperation in Yuska's eyes, the pleading that seemed to hang in the air. For a brief moment, He felt the weight of her words press down on him. She was asking for help. Her people were in danger, and she was asking him, a stranger, to fight for them. But everything he had learned in his life as a cowboy told him to be careful. The world didn't offer favors without asking for something in return. And even though Yiska's confession had shown him a side of her he hadn't expected, he couldn't ignore the feeling of betrayal that lingered in his chest. She had used him after all. She had lied to him and made him trust her for the sake of her tribe's mission. The silence stretched on, and the cowboy finally spoke, his voice rough with the mix of emotions that swirled inside him. "I don't know what to believe anymore, Yiska. You've told me your people need help, but how do I know I'm not just another pawn in your game?" Yiska's face fell, the hope in her eyes dimming slightly. She took a step forward, her voice trembling as she answered, "I never wanted to deceive you, I swear, but I had to do what I was told. My people are in danger and they believe that you, someone from outside our world, could help us. It's not easy for us to ask, but we have no other choice." The cowboy ran a hand through his hair, the exhaustion of the past few days weighing heavily on him. He had been through a lot already, fleeing from one place to another, constantly moving, trying to outrun his past. And now this. A plea for help from a woman he thought he could trust, but who had kept secrets from him all along. He thought about her story. The Apache people were proud and strong, known for their ability to survive and fight for their land. The cowboy had heard rumors of the government's push to take more land from the tribes, to force them onto reservations where they would be confined and controlled. Yiska had said her people were at risk. Was that the truth? Was it possible that her tribe's survival depended on outsiders like him? "You're telling me your people want my help?" the cowboy asked, still incredulous. "You need someone like me to fight for you? Why not ask for help from your own people?" Yiska's eyes lowered, a shadow crossing her face. "Our people are strong, but we can't fight the government alone. We've tried. We've lost too many already. They have more resources, more men, and they have the law on their side. We need someone who knows how to survive out here, someone who can get us what we need, someone who can teach us how to fight back." The cowboy felt a pang of sympathy, but he also felt a deep sense of unease. He didn't know if he was ready to be a part of this fight, to risk his life for a cause he didn't fully understand. He had enough problems of his own, and he wasn't sure if he could trust Yiska enough to get involved in something this dangerous. "I've been on my own for a long time," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I've made my peace with that. I don't need any more trouble." Yiska's face crumpled, and for a moment she looked like she might break. The cowboy felt a twist in his gut, and a part of him, the part that still had some decency left, couldn't ignore the pain in her eyes. He had been alone for so long, but maybe, just maybe, he could make a difference for someone else. "I didn't want to drag you into this," Yiska whispered, her voice raw with emotion, "but my people are desperate. And I didn't know how else to get through to you. I thought if I could make you trust me, you might help. I've never been in a position like this before. I didn't want to lie to you, but I had to for their sake." The cowboy closed his eyes, the weight of her words pressing down on him. He had always prided himself on his ability to see through lies, to read people and situations. But this was different. He had fallen for it. He had let himself believe that the connection they shared was real, even when all along it had been part of her mission. The truth hurt, but at least now he understood. Yiska took a step closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please help us. We don't have much time. The government is getting closer. We need someone who can help us make a stand. If you don't, everything we've worked for will be gone." The cowboy felt a deep sense of conflict. He wanted to walk away, to escape this mess and leave it behind like so many other things in his life. But the part of him that still believed in justice, in doing what was right, couldn't just turn his back on her or her people. He looked at her, searching her eyes for any sign of dishonesty. But all he saw was desperation, fear, and a genuine need for help. Maybe he had been wrong to doubt her. Maybe this was his chance to do something that mattered. "All right," he said, his voice steady but quiet. "I'll help. But you need to promise me one thing." Yiska looked up at him, hope flickering back in her eyes. "Anything. You need to be straight with me from now on," the cowboy said, his tone serious. "No more lies. No more games. I need to know everything if I'm going to help you and your people." Yiska nodded eagerly. "I promise. I'll tell you everything. I swear." The cowboy let out a long breath, feeling the weight of the decision settle on his shoulders. This wasn't going to be easy. He didn't know what kind of trouble he was walking into, but he also knew that he couldn't leave Yiska to face it alone. Not now that he understood the stakes. "We start tomorrow," he said, his voice firm. "I'll need to know where to go, what to do, and I'll need your help. If we're doing this, we're doing it together." Yiska's face lit up with gratitude, and for the first time since they had met, the cowboy saw a spark of hope in her. It wasn't the same hope she had shown before, the kind that had made her look like a woman with a plan. This was different. It was the kind of hope that came from someone who had found an ally in the darkest of times. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking. "Thank you for believing in us." The cowboy nodded. "We'll see how long this belief lasts when we're in the thick of it. But I'm in. For now." Yiska stepped forward and reached out to touch his arm, her touch soft but firm. "You don't know what this means to me, to us. You're giving us a chance when no one else would." The cowboy nodded again, his mind already thinking about the next steps. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he knew that the road they were about to travel would be long and filled with danger. He could only hope that he had made the right decision. As the night stretched on, the cowboy and Yiska sat together in the quiet hut, the weight of their new alliance settling between them. Tomorrow would be a new day, and with it the beginning of a fight that neither of them had ever imagined. The morning came sooner than the cowboy had expected. The sun had barely risen, but the weight of the decision he had made the night before hung heavily on him. Yiska had left early to gather supplies for their journey, but he was still in the hut, feeling a mix of confusion and determination. He had agreed to help her, and now there was no turning back. The reality of what lay ahead began to settle in. He had been involved in one too many dangerous situations in his life, but this was different. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight for people's lives. The cowboy stood up from the bed and stretched his sore muscles. He had been traveling for days before he arrived at this village, and the strain of the journey had taken its toll. But now he had a new purpose. As he prepared himself for what was to come, the thought of Yiska and her people lingered in his mind. She was not just a stranger anymore. She was someone who had reached out for help, someone who had shown him a side of herself that was real, despite the deception. Outside the hut, the village seemed quieter than usual. The once bustling paths were now empty, and the air had an eerie stillness to it. The cowboy could feel the weight of the tension that had settled in the air. Something was coming, something that Yiska had warned him about. The government was getting closer. The danger was real, and he was about to step into the heart of it. He stepped outside, squinting in the bright morning light. Yiska was standing near a small fire, preparing a simple breakfast. She looked up when she saw him, her face lighting up with a soft smile. But even though her expression seemed warm, he could still see the uncertainty in her eyes. She too was nervous about what lay ahead. "Good morning," she said, her voice carrying the familiar warmth he had come to expect. But there was something different about it now, a sense of urgency that hadn't been there before. "We need to move quickly. I've gathered what we need. We can't afford to wait any longer." The cowboy nodded, his thoughts already racing. He wasn't sure what the next few days would hold, but he knew that Yiska and her people needed him. If he could help them, maybe he could finally make something right in a world that had offered him little but hardship. "What's the plan?" he asked, his voice steady but unsure. Yiska handed him a small bundle of supplies. "We need to head north to a place where the government's reach hasn't gotten yet. We have a group of people there, survivors, refugees. They need protection. We've been moving them slowly, but now the danger is too close. If we don't act fast, we'll lose them." The cowboy took the bundle and slung it over his shoulder. His mind raced as he processed the information. He had no idea how to protect a group of people from the government, especially when they had more power and more men. But the look in Yiska's eyes told him that she wasn't asking for his help, just to protect the people of her tribe. She was asking him to fight, to make a stand, and that was something he wasn't sure he was ready for. But in his heart, he knew he couldn't back down. Not now, not after everything that had happened. He had chosen this path, and there was no turning back. "I'm with you," he said, his voice firm. "Let's go." Together, they set off toward the north, moving quickly but cautiously. The land around them was dry and barren, but it wasn't without its beauty. The rugged hills and vast desert stretched out before them, a harsh landscape that seemed to mirror the struggle they were about to face. As they traveled, the cowboy couldn't help but think about how far he had come. He had been on the run for most of his life, always looking for a way out of the mess he had made of things. But now, for the first time in a long while, he felt like he had a purpose, and for that he couldn't help but feel a small sense of pride. As they journeyed deeper into the wilderness, the cowboy and Yiska grew closer. There was a quiet understanding between them now. They didn't need to speak much. They both knew the gravity of the situation. And in that silence, the cowboy began to understand something else about Yiska. She was more than just a woman on a mission. She was a leader, someone who cared deeply for her people. And though she had deceived him at the start, he could see the sincerity in her actions now. She wasn't just using him. She was trusting him to help her save her tribe. Days passed and the journey grew harder. The terrain became rougher and the cowboy's body grew tired. But Yiska was always there, steady and determined. She guided them through the difficult paths, never once faltering in her resolve. The cowboy couldn't help but admire her strength, her courage. She was everything he had thought she wasn't, a liar, a trickster. And yet in a way she was more than that. She had proven herself to him, and that meant something. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they reached the small camp where the survivors were hiding. The cowboy's heart sank when he saw the state of the people there. They were tired, worn down by the long journey, and their faces were etched with worry. But there was also hope, and that hope came from Yiska. She stepped forward, her voice steady as she addressed the group. "We've made it," she said. "We've found a safe place, but we can't stay here for long. We need to keep moving. The government will come looking for us, but with your help we can survive." The cowboy stood off to the side, watching the scene unfold. The people gathered around Yiska, listening to her words. There was a fire in their eyes, a fire that had been reignited by her presence. She was their leader, their beacon of hope in a world that had left them with nothing. For the first time since arriving in the village, the cowboy felt a sense of peace settle over him. He had made the right choice. He had chosen to fight, to stand by Yiska and her people, and it felt like the right thing to do. But as he stood there, watching the survivors gather their belongings and prepare for the next leg of their journey, he couldn't help but feel the weight of what was to come. The government would stop at nothing to crush them, and the road ahead would be dangerous. But they had made it this far, and with each step the cowboy could see that the tribe's hope had returned. "Thank you," Yiska said softly as she approached him. "You've done more than you know." The cowboy nodded, his heart heavy but proud. "We'll do what we have to. Together." As the group packed up and prepared to leave, the cowboy realized that this journey had changed him. No longer was he just a man running from his past. Now he was part of something bigger, something worth fighting for. And as he took his place at the front of the group, he knew that no matter what happened, he wouldn't back down. Not now, not ever.